I call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It gives me a lot of pleasure to speak in the second reading of the Sullivan Birth Certificate Bill, and I want to begin by paying a tribute to the sponsor of the bill, my colleague Lewis Wall, and say that yet again she has brought issues to this House that have caused a lot of interest. We've had a lot of consideration at the Select Committee, and I'm pleased that it was referred to our Select Committee. It was a real privilege to be part of that process. I want to pay a tribute to our Select Committee members. Some of the issues were more complex than we perhaps had originally considered, and both the Select Committee members and the officials deserve a note of tribute for the way that they gave and received a lot of questions and a lot of answers, and I think that really paid respect to the bill itself and the purpose of the bill. But more than Lewis Wall and the Select Committee members and the officials, I want to pay tribute to the three women who this bill is about. The late Diane Sullivan, Doreen Shields and their daughter Rowan Sullivan. This bill is really a bit of a love story. It's a story about the relationship that Diane and Doreen had and the fact that they raised their daughter together in times that were perhaps a little ahead of the societal recognition and what is not an unusual practice now of same-sex couples raising children together. So I want to pay a tribute first of all to Doreen and her love and mother of her daughter, the late Diane, and their daughter Rowan. Doreen and Rowan appeared before the Select Committee, and I think most of us would recognise that a bunch of MPs sitting in a room is not an easy process. We're a little bit intimidating. We don't try to be, but I think we are. The formality of a Select Committee process can also be quite daunting for people to go through. And that's at a time when you're talking about something that's quite theoretical. You might be talking about a tax change, or you might be talking about something that's really one step removed from your life. People find that process quite a scary prospect and often get quite rattled when they come before Select Committee. So to have people come to a Select Committee talking about the very essence of their relationships and lives and why they want us to make a law change took a lot of courage, and I want to particularly acknowledge the courage and strength that Doreen and Rowan showed towards each other, but also acknowledge that this reinforced to the committee just how important this move was. Their story said it all for us, actually. We understood that this was not a minor technical issue, that this really talked about the recognition of society towards their relationship. And I know that all members of the Select Committee were very moved by their presentation, by the reality of their situation, and by the fact that we had the opportunity to recognise the relationship of Diane and Doreen and their legitimate parenting of Rowan in the law. The Deputy Chair, Chris Ockenbow, in his contribution made a comment about the fact that we thought that once we had made this clear, a birth certificate would suffice for all purposes. And that was one of the many challenges that the officials threw to us, that this proof of parenthood might have to be done through some other method at some time in the future. So we decided that was a nonsense, actually. We didn't decide, I'm not saying the advice was a nonsense. We thought the requirement to do that would be a nonsense. So we've made it clear that this is it. Once Parliament sets the seal on this, then Diane and Doreen are Rowan's legitimate parents for all purposes, and neither they nor Parliament will ever have to go through this again. And I think it was probably important for us to have the debate, but none of us could think of one single instance in our own lives when we'd had to produce anything other than our birth certificate with our parents' name in order to prove who our parents were. But anyway, we've put it beyond doubt, I trust, and in committee stages I'm sure that we'll make sure that that is the case. Mr Speaker, as I said, I want to particularly recognise the love that Diane and Doreen and Rowan have and had for each other, and say that Parliament doesn't often get that sort of involvement in our debate, and it's a responsibility that I'm sure every member of this House will take very seriously as we go through the debate and go through the voting process. I want to quote a couple of things that Doreen said in terms of how she felt, and she said it publicly, so I'm not breaching any privacy, but it had a huge impact on me, and I'm sure it will on others, how she felt when, following the passing of her partner and her adoption of Rowan, so that Rowan wouldn't be left as a legal orphan, so that she had a legal living parent, she saw her partner's name, Rowan's birth mother's name, taken from the birth certificate. She said it was horrible. She said, given what Diane went through and how she'd struggled to be there for Rowan, it was just obscene, quite honestly. I don't think any of us can imagine how hard that would be, to watch your partner's name being taken from the birth certificate of your child, their child and your child, in order for you to become their legitimate in terms of the law parent. That wrench must have been huge. And it's so good to be able to put what I think is an injustice right through this process. Rowan, who of course is the holder of this birth certificate and is the centre of attention as far as the legal change, said actually it wasn't about her. She said, and I'm quoting her, "It's more about my parents. Having me in the 90s when gay people having children was very uncommon, they showed a lot of bravery and courage. They chose to have me together and made many sacrifices to give me the best life possible, and I want that to be recognised legally. I had two parents, and my birth certificate should show that." It doesn't seem to be a very big ask, Mr. Speaker. I think it's something that every member of this House should want to support, and I certainly hope as the debate progresses that that's where we get to in terms of the recognition in the law of the legitimate parents of Rowan. As I said earlier, this only came about because of the death of Diane Sullivan. When she died as Rowan's birth mother, Rowan was legally an orphan. She had no legitimate in the law living parent, and that wasn't acceptable to her mother, Doreen Shields. We all know that there can be circumstances where those legitimate relationships that are not upheld in the law, Mr. Speaker, can cause problems. So it is really important in terms of your will, in terms of other arrangements such as medical decisions. There are many circumstances in which having a legally recognised relation, mother in this case, is very important, and it was for Doreen and Rowan. But I actually think it was important because that was the nature of their relationship and the law was behind the eight ball. So it was only because of that situation that this really unfortunate circumstance arose. We heard a lot of concerns at the Select Committee, not raised in any attempt to undermine this, but concerns about whether this would set a precedent, whether it would provide unfairness to other people who may be in a situation where they didn't know who their birth parent was and found out at a later stage and wanted them put in the birth certificate. We had all sorts of discussions and considerations around that. In the end, we came back to what I think was the correct advice, and certainly was the leadership that Louisa Wall provided when she introduced this bill. This is a standalone situation designed specifically for this family. It doesn't set any precedents, and actually if it did, I'd be very happy for any family in a similar situation to have the same legal recognition, but it is a circumstance that will not arise in the future because of subsequent law changes, and I think that's a very good thing. I enjoyed listening to the discussion around this. I enjoyed the submissions, and I am delighted to be able to support this bill to progress an injustice and recognise the love and the relationship of Diane and Doreen and Rowan. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call the honourable member.